Well, thanks, Mary, for that introduction. I have my notes. I'm not going to do any slides, and I usually do, so I usually go off those, and I don't have them. So I made myself some notes this morning. I actually struggled. When Mary and Joel asked me to do this, I first thought no, and I have nothing to offer this group. And they got on the phone with me and they convinced me to do this, and I've been putting together. And then this morning, Joel emailed, we were exchanging emails, he made a comment, he said, why don't you just tell your story about the things you want to talk about in your career through other places? And I thought, wow, I'll do that. And so this morning I made my notes. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully I can keep you awake. So the title of my talk with you is two topics: data interoperability and interoperability. And you'll have to figure out what that means as we move along. First, I'm going to talk about data interoperability. And like I said, this is going to be a story, or I'm going to try to make a story of my career in IT and my experiences with data interoperability. And so we got about 40 years to work with here. I've been in healthcare IT struggling with this same problem for 40 years. And it is still a problem today, isn't it? And so let's see what I've come up with here. First of all, when you look at data interoperability, you got to kind of wonder why it's so hard. You look at the finance industry, right? You look at ATMs and you look at online banking and you look at all this stuff that now I can tie my Wells Fargo and my Bank of America accounts together and send my kids all kinds of money. All they do is they text me and I can just text some money back and it all connects and it all happens way too easy. And they know it. Like I need, X number of dollars, Dad, right now. And you can happen right now. You look at the utility industries. They're all connected. You look at the military. You look at other industries that are moving on. How come they got this so right and we got it so wrong? And we took so long to do it. So, if you look at healthcare, you've been around as long as I have been, the first data that we had in healthcare, and it was actually data that was around for a long time, was billing data. It was all about collecting dollars. Even the first clinical information systems, if you look at them really good, they're all about collecting information so you could bill right. Even if you look at EMRs today, a main focus of those is to capture and bill properly. So billing data has been around for a long time. We still haven't got that right. Have any of you had the opportunity to work with payers yet and getting data from payers? You'd think that they'd kind of have the same kind of data, claims data, and look alike, and it's a nightmare to work with it still today. In the 1970s, I started my healthcare IT work at University of California, Irvine. And I was a programmer back then. And I was lucky and fortunate enough to work on one of the very first clinical information systems ever put out in healthcare. It was a system called Technicon Data Systems. Anyone ever hear of that? Or TDS. And it was actually a system that was built in the aerospace industry and then modified for healthcare. It was a really neat system. It was totally proprietary. Ran on an IBM mainframe, had its own proprietary database that you could not crack or get into or work with. It had its own devices, own monitors, and had its own cabling network. It wasn't Ethernet, it wasn't IBM, it was its own dedicated. You had to run this thing all through the entire hospital and administrative areas and put their monitors in. These monitors had 40 characters across and about 16 rows down. And it was all green, a big flashing light stuff, and no keyboard. It just had what's called a light pen. And you just clicked on things. And as a programmer, you programmed to highlight and turn on and turn off things that could be activated where people clicked. And it was really what was called a clinical order entry system, CPOE. That's all you initially did. That was in the 70s and the 80s. It was the first system in healthcare that really was a clinical information system. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the people that installed one of those, and we did that at UC Irvine. It's funny in IT, if you've been around long enough, you start hearing new words that when you look into it, it really means the same thing as something else that we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but they just renamed it so they can respin it and charge money and consulting and do it all over again and do it in a different way. It's just amazing. And so in healthcare, way back then, you talk about data interoperability, there was none. you had these clinical billing systems as we moved into the 80s, and you had this clinical information system, TDS, and they each had their own medical record numbers. And there was no way to make them talk to each other. So you logged into one, and you had to log into another one. You had to do cross-referencing to find the right patient, or type in other data to find the right patient. So, and they had, back then, they had something called, some systems had something called an exit routine. And an exit routine is an API, just renamed as an API, a little bit more advanced in today's world. And what it was, if I could really go back in time on you as an assembler programmer, you had an instruction in assembler code in the code of the system, and it was called a no-op, and it was a branch to nowhere. So as the logic got executed, the code just went through and nothing happened. And what you would do as a user, you could change that branch to somewhere else in memory, and you could write your code right there, and then you had to branch back. And that was our API. It was an exit routine. And so I developed an exit routine in TDS, and I developed one in Envision, which are our clinical system. And I went out and got data in one to move over to the other one after we registered a patient, so we knew what the medical record was from that system, so we could make a connection. We would store that medical record number in the other system. And I'm not sure it was the first one ever done, but it was darn close to it. And I wrote that in the mid-'80s. And when I went back to UC Irvine in 2008, it was still running. Can you believe that? Still running. And there was nobody maintaining it because no one knew assembler back. It was just running. And if it broke, they just rebooted, and it just kept on running then. They clear the queues out and reboot it. So, and to give you an idea of how hard things were back then, we used things called CCWs, channel command words, and it was a word, and a word was 4 bytes. And in that word, you would stick in 1 byte, you would stick the destination of the storage director outside the mainframe that you want to talk to. And in the next byte, we would store the disk drive that we want to talk to. And the next one, we would store the cylinder, because it was stacks of platters, the cylinder and the track and the record number that we wanted to go retrieve. And I would go get that information, bring it in, move it across the other system, and then store it in there. That's the kind of work that was my first experience with interoperability into some sense. Pretty primitive, huh? but it got the job done. And so I'm going to move around here for you. Then I moved to Kaiser Permanente. So those are my experiences, those kinds of things at UC Irvine. And at Kaiser, we installed Epic there. We weren't the first, but we were one of the first to install a hospital-based Epic system. And it was absolutely the biggest one that ever did. In fact, Kaiser turned out to be such a big implementation that we realized it wouldn't all fit in one production version of it. So it turned out we had to run 18 production versions of Epic to fit all of Kaiser on the system. So we had a problem. If a patient was in one hospital and then they went down to another hospital, they didn't know what their data was because it was in a different version of Epic. It was a different production system running. If a physician worked at one hospital and then went somewhere else, that physician wouldn't exist in the system. So we worked with Epic, and Epic developed a product called, I don't know if it was Care Everywhere or Care Anywhere, I get them confused. But that's a product that they use today. It allows their EMRs, their own EMR, the same one, to talk to each other. Now you would think that would be really easy. Epic talking to Epic, right? Cerner talking to Cerner. Sunrise talking to Sunrise. I can tell you it's not. If you've seen one Cerner Epic install, you've seen one Cerner Epic install. Because we can define the fields the way we want to define them. Because there aren't real standards. There's attempts to it, but not so much back then. So a big learning for me was the importance of standardizing data in EMRs, because someday they're going to want to talk to each other within Kaiser. But what the real problem was that I didn't realize was someday we're going to want to talk to EMRs all over the country, aren't we? And we needed the same kind of thinking that they had to do in Epic. Interesting experience for myself. Then Epic had an enterprise data warehouse called Clarion. I think it was called Clarion. I could be wrong. I can't. Is that something like that. And we learned right away that you couldn't do anything with it. It was on a database called Cache, great database for transactional stuff, terrible database for data warehouse kind of stuff. And so we had to get the data out and put it into a whole nother data warehouse so we could work with it. Well, that took Kaiser years to figure out how to do that. So, you know, there was just things in the 80s and the 90s, and this is the late 90s now, early 20s, even early 2000s, that we're challenging with. The other thing, so I think that was Kaiser. My experience was wow, EMRs have got to be able to talk to EMRs, not just financial and clinical systems. And it's not easy to do. Moving along in my story, my next stop was a City of Hope, a cancer research center in California, great philanthropy organization, phenomenal clinical system, totally screwed up administratively, but what a phenomenal clinical organization. And a great learning experience at City of Hope. I had a young lady working for me, and she had her degree in clinical informatics or data informatics. And I'd never had someone like that work for me. And I was fascinated by what she knew and what she was interested in. As we were talking one day and she was educating me stuff, she said, Jim, you really should go talk to the researchers here because they have some real needs that we can't give them. And I said, well, what would researchers want with our data? And so I said, well, set up a meeting with the chair of this research stuff. And we sat and we talked, and he explained what he was trying to do. And one of the first things, I'll never forget, he said, he said, what are your barriers? I said, our biggest barrier is a CIO. Because you got all the data in there, you won't let us have it. You won't let us look at it, you won't let us touch it, you won't let us do anything with it. You're my biggest problem. I was blown away. And as he educated me about the importance of data, I began to understand, wow, there is so much we can do to help, you know, and we don't have to be a physician. We don't have to be a nurse to actually help and participate in, because I could never be any of that. I passed out at the sight of blood. But we could contribute and we could help. And he told me something that I'll never forget. I don't know if it's still true today. Jill, maybe you could answer this question if it's true today. But he said, it takes 17 years, typically in healthcare, from something to go from the bench to the bedside. So kind of like in the beginning stages, all the way to where it's kind of like approved, FDA approved, and in healthcare, 17 years. Is that a true kind of a thing? Do you think?
It sort of depends on the thing, but I'm sure
there's
more than that.
Okay. I mean, this is 20 years ago, so I'm thinking, is it still like that? You know, but I thought, wow, how? And as he talked about what his needs were, I thought, wow, we could help. We could get him data, and he could do things faster, and we could help him do that. So we had a great initiative. We had a great time in the years I was at City of Hope. I learned a ton about how research and clinical go together, and us and IT are right in the middle, and we can help if we just get engaged and listen to what they need and help get them the data, and not use HIPAA and not use security and not use all kinds of other excuses to not let them have what they need and what they want. Because it's easy to do that. So then I moved back to UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine, back there again. They asked me to come back. And and this was in 2008 now. And we had health reform, right? And meaningful use, and the triple aim. And I got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of regulatory things and the government getting in the way and stuff, but in all honesty, when you look at what health reform and what meaningful use and the triple aim did to move the agenda of interoperability, it probably did more than anything else that I know of in the history of healthcare and IT. It was the one thing that made the vendors get off their butts and actually start working together, and made us in IT try to make some things happen. Too bad it took us so long to do that. Here's some learnings from UC Irvine that I had. I came in and they had multiple clinical and registration and billing systems going on, and we were going to move to one. And we used automated tools now, like the one I wrote, to connect patients and connect their medical records, right? But guess what? If you don't capture the data right, you might not get the right patient, right? So we had this terrible thing called duplicate medical record numbers. How many of you know what duplicate medical record numbers are? They are the worst. They're like the words you shouldn't talk about if you're really interested in interoperability in healthcare. because they kill everything. Think about a patient portal, and you want to give patients all their clinical data, and if you get duplicate medical records built into that thing, what that does. I'm looking at somebody else's data. I'm not looking at all my data. Think about exchanges. We're exchanging information between EMRs and we get the wrong patients and we're exchanging wrong data. This is a huge problem. This is the problem I began to understand at UC Irvine my second round, how important it is that we think through this and we get this one right. And if we don't get this right, nothing works. The other thing that popped up this time was RIOs, Regional Health Information Organizations. And this came from health reform, and a lot of the states use them, and they popped up, and their whole purpose was to connect EMRs and exchange data. And have they been successful? I'm not sure, but we learned a lot from them. In California, I sat on state boards, we drove the agenda, and we learned a lot about how to connect EMRs. We learned a lot about data problems and normalization and what all that stuff means and how we need people like yourselves to fix those things because they're way too complicated for us. I also learned about opt-in and opt-out. How many of you know about patient consent and opting in and opting out? Do you know what it is? So as an informatics person, you want to only go to work for places. This should be a question on your interview. Do you do opt-in or opt-out? And if they say opt-in, run. And we learned in California, because the state let us do what we wanted in the different reels, we learned right away opt-out's the only way it's ever going to work. Because what opt-in means is that you're assumed not wanting to play in the exchange unless you tell us you want in. Opt-out means we're assuming you're in unless you tell us you want out. So which way do you think the state of New York took? Opt-in. I didn't ask that question when I moved from California to New York. And it's a huge problem in the state of New York, huge problem. In the reels today, the state of New York is spending about $60 to $70 million a year to try and make Shiny and these reels work. Their hit ratio is about 32%. And the usage of physicians is like 11%. It's, in my mind, an absolute total failure. And then they put a requirement in Disrupt to try and make us all use it in Disrupt, thinking if we could shove it down everybody's throat in Disrupt, it would work. That didn't work either. Anyhow, I learned that was a good one. Opt-in and opt-out. And HIPAA, we got to be careful of HIPAA, because HIPAA, you know, as people that are interested in data and actually doing good things for people with data, we have to be mindful of how we're protecting it and what we're doing. But it can kill us too with some of the regulatory guidelines. If they keep making them really difficult, we simply can't do our jobs. The last one, I think, in UC Irvine, I had that, remember that data girl I had at City of Hope? I brought her with me to UC Irvine, and she helped me build a clinical informatics kind of a team. Nothing like what Joel's got here, the kind of experience, but we built something. And from that, we started working with other UC hospitals. There's 6 systems: UCLA, Davis, San Diego, San Francisco, and UC Irvine. And we started exchanging data. And we learned all over again, even for research, how difficult this is, how the normalizing and all this work is so complicated and important. But today, Lisa Dahm, who is the lady that ran this for me, is running the clinical enterprise data warehouses for research across the entire UC system. So I'm real proud of her for doing that. Then I left California and came to New York, and when I came here at Stony Brook. And at Stony Brook, some of the things, again, a great learning experience for me in the ways of data. And I got to tell you a story, though. I got to stop and tell you a story here. How am I doing on time? Am I okay on time? Okay. So when I was interviewing, if you notice, Murry said that they came on right before I did. So when I was interviewing, Joel was just coming on. And Joel decided he wanted to be part of the interview process. So we had like this one-on-one interview, and it did not go well at all. He left telling the dean that this guy is not going to work, and I left saying it's not going to work if he's going to be here. And so the dean talked to both of us one-on-one, and we had to get together again and made us get together a second time. And it didn't go much better, did it? The second one didn't go much better. So he talked to us again and made us get together a third time. And I think the third time we finally kind of got our act together. But I will tell you, I have never worked with someone like Dr. Soltz and his wife. They have been phenomenal partners. I think you're very fortunate to be part of their programs, and what a collaborative partner, and what I've learned from him. Is Jonas still here? Okay. So Jonas is one of his, I'll call him scientists, and I'd have meetings with sometimes with the two of them, and we would talk about strategies and where we're going. And I would take my watch. They didn't know I did this, but I would take my watch and I would press the start on the timer on it, and my goal would be to see how long I could go before they totally lost me. And I would shoot like, okay, 5 minutes. And I go, like, let's see if I can go 10 minutes this time before I'm totally lost and I had to like start faking everything. And usually 5-10 minutes was the max I could go. But incredible thinkers, incredible problem solvers, and that's what we need. I'm gonna get into that here in a few minutes. So back to Stony Brook. So some of the focuses and things I learned was patient-centric, right? That's a big part of the triple aim, is about the patient, involving the patient. And what did I learn? You gotta have interoperability. IT can do so much for patient engagement. We can do, it's ridiculous what we can do, the things we can think up, but we can't get the data, we can't get our acts together with the data. We meet in industry. Exchanges, huge in New York, great vision, just haven't been really successful at executing. And then Distrip in the state of New York, what a great opportunity for a data exchange. And then probably the most exciting thing, I think, since I've ever been in healthcare, population management. And this is a whole new world. In my opinion, this is now the #1 priority of health IT. It's not the EMR. EMRs are just, you buy them, you install them, they run, and you're done. It's population management, those platforms, and what you can do with those, and what we can do with that stuff that's going to make a difference in healthcare. And so those were my experiences, my exposures at Stony Brook. What great things. And then from there I went on to, as you can guess, I kind of move around a lot. Catholic Health Services here on the island. We're a 6-hospital system on the island here. And continued those same things. And it's been a great pleasure because of all the experience and things I learned here and everywhere else. I walked in there, they said, Jim, here's the problem. We need this and we need this done and we need population management. We need things stood up. We have value-based payment contracts. We have no IT. And they gave me a bunch of money and we started working on it. And one of my first problems was we took an inventory of their what's called their IPA, their Independent Practice Association, which is all their practices that are part of their value-based payment contracts. And I said, I need to know how many different EMRs we have in this thing. We had 63 different EMRs. So there was our first challenge. How do we connect these 63, get all their data into one place and normalize it so we can actually use it for a population management platform to do population management? And in the last year, I got to tell you, we have kicked butt because of the years of experience and years of trying, and the tools have matured, as Ryan was talking about here before myself, and great people and making things happen. And so it's exciting, and things are moving along. And it only took us 40 years, and we're not done yet. So in 40 years, we've come a long ways in this area, but we have a long ways to go. It took way too long, in my opinion. It cost way too much money, and we're still not there. And so that's what the second part of my topic is, and that is interoperability. And what I mean by that is between IT and clinical informatics. That's the interoperability that needs to occur now so the data part works, in my opinion. So I'm going to flip over the page here and talk a little bit about this. So that interoperability that I'm talking about between IT and clinical informatics, that has to work, and it has to progress like data interoperability needed to progress from the 70s, but it can't take 40 years, right? It's got maybe 40 months, maybe 40 weeks, maybe 40 days. And I want to give you my perspective of what IT is good at and what I think clinical informatics is good at. And I'll probably get this wrong. These are just my opinions, but I wanted to tell you, and then how you push them together. And when I was first writing this, I thought, ooh, I need a Venn diagram to show the overlap. And there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a lot that isn't an overlap, but they go together really well. So I'll start with IT. So we're good at implementing solutions. We're good at project management. We're good at productionalizing something and making it production where it has high availability and good performance, and it runs and it gets updated, and that's what we're good at in IT. We're good, and this is a really important one, we're good at fitting a round peg in a square hole. And what I mean by that is that our problem is we're limited in our knowledge of what our tools are. So we get a tool in IT and we try and make everything work in that tool. How do we solve problem A with this tool? How do we solve problem B with this tool? How do we solve problem C with this tool? Because those are the tools that we know of and we know how to use. So if you really look at IT, we solve lots of problems, but we don't do them the best way because we do them with the tool we have. We're not good at looking for new pegs to fit in the hole. Informatics. You're good at understanding the power of shiny objects. So in IT, we like shiny objects, and usually we buy them and we get them and then we install them and we look at them. We don't know what to do with them. From my observations, you're good at knowing what that shiny object can do. So think about that, you know what they can do. We want to use them. We have the money for them. We need to get together. Good at innovation. Good at finding the new shaped peg to fit in the square hole. So when IT looks at a problem, I saw Stony Brook, when we look at a problem in IT, we're trying to solve it with the tools I have. But Joel's team, they'll look at it and talk about things I've never heard of before, how to solve the problem. That's what we don't have in IT, and that's why we're being limited and why we're acting slow and why we're not progressing in the organization, because we don't have your part. We're missing that part. Typically, clinical informatics isn't good at putting things into production. But that's okay because we are. So you see, you take those things and you put them together, and we take our strengths and we put them together, and we look at problems and we can solve them much better. And I'll tell you, I think the problem is IT, because we see the problems and we don't share them with you. We see them in the meetings and the things we're given, and we go and try and solve them. We have to change that model to bring in. Clinical informatics needs to be brought into everything we're looking at, every decision we're making. And I know that's a threat in IT. We see that as a threat, but it shouldn't be a threat, because you'll bring new innovation and new ideas about how to solve problems that we won't solve right. Let me see if I'm covering my bases here. So in solving problems and in working together, there's two areas I think you can go into. You can go into local or national. Local is like here at Stony Brook. You're going to solve problems, and it's great. That's what I like to do. I've tried the national, I'm not any good at it, and you work here. National says, you know what? I want to solve the problem in a big way for all the healthcare across the nation. I want to get involved at that kind of a level. So think about that when you decide what you want to do. Where do you want to work? You want to work at the local level, or you want to work at the national level? We need people in both. Be careful of HIPAA and regulatory requirements. They will kill us. They will slow us down. They will stop us dead in our tracks. If you're, I know there's no CIOs in here, but I would tell you, if you're a CIO, when I work with my new compliance officer or my new legal, I looked right away to find out, are they there to understand my problem and help me solve my problem, or are they there to shut me down? And compliance and legal can be either type. And the ones that are there just to say no, 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 you want to get rid of them and get the ones that want to sit down, hear what your problem is, and then help you solve it in a legal, safe way. We don't spend enough time, we don't invest enough money, and we don't invest enough resources in managing our data. It's a shame, the money we put in healthcare IT and the little bit we put in managing and understanding our data. And that needs to be fixed. Another very important lesson I learned when I was at Kaiser Permanente, they did some work with Gartner, and they were assessing their data as we were building this great big thing for Kaiser. And they came back so who do you, let me say it, Kaiser is the second largest owner of property in the state of California. Next only to the state of California. That's how much property they own in California. And they came back and they said, you know what? We've looked at this, and as you're building this infrastructure and all this stuff for us, data is going to become our most valuable asset. Think about that. People that are used to brick and mortar don't think about that. Data is an incredibly valuable asset. So we've got to invest the money to manage it and take care of it and protect it. I'm out of notes. So I hope this made some sense. I know it didn't give you anything about direction, but maybe about how far we've come and where you can pick up the baton and take off, as I'm going to gear up for retirement in a few years and watch you guys work. It's always a pleasure working with Dr. Saltz, and he's got a great team, and I hope we get to work together again someday. So thank you.